Hey there, Brian Goulet here of gouletpens.com, and I wanted to shoot this video today because I've been getting a lot of questions about the Omas Ogiva Alba fountain pen and how it writes. It's got 5 different nib sizes, a 14 karat extra fine, extra-flessibile. I have an 18 karat extra fine, an 18 karat fine, 18 karat medium, and an 18 karat medium italic, which is about a 1.1 italic. So I thought it would be nice to put it all together. I was already going to be doing writing samples anyway to put into the Nib Nook on gouletpens.com. You can compare it to all of the pens that I carry on my store with that comparison tool. But while I had them inked up, I just couldn't help but seize the opportunity to shoot this little video for you with some of my raw thoughts of what it's like to use each of these nibs. So I hope you enjoy. All right, so to do my writing samples here, I have Rhodia. This is actually a number 18 dot pad. It's 80 gram white paper, very smooth, hint of feedback, but overall very reliable paper, very consistent. I'm very familiar with it. That's why I like this paper. And for all of my writing samples here, I'm using Noodler's Black. This is my relatively empty bottle that I use for all of my Nib Nook writing samples on gouletpens.com. So it's an ink that I'm very familiar with on a paper that I'm very familiar with. So I thought it'd be good to sample up all the Ogivas on this particular paper. So what I've done is I've inked up all the 5 sizes that I currently have. And I'm gonna start with the extra fine, extra-flessibile, which is Italian for flexible, if you're wondering why it's spelled like that. It's a very soft nib. It's got some good line variation on it. So I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of a writing sample here. So it's very soft. This ink is a little bit wet, but if you see, if I'm writing with just a little bit of pressure, you know, it's not going to be like a Japanese extra fine or something like that. Like, just for a comparison, I have a Platinum Preppy extra fine, and just to give you an idea, you know, there's a Platinum Preppy extra fine. So it's not going to be super, super, super extra fine. Okay, so just kind of get that right out there. But the nice thing that this does have is it's got some line variation. So if you are writing with no pressure, these are the lines you're gonna get. You know, overall, not bad. But if you're writing with even a little bit of pressure, you're going to get some good variation. Now, the disclaimer that I want to have about this specific nib size is you do not want to really press hard, especially if you have experience with like a Noodler's Flex Pen or a Pilot Falcon, something like that. This nib is softer than both of those. So you don't want to really bear down because you'll overextend those tines, flex it out, and you'll do what's called springing the tines, which means you'll start to have flow issues. It'll write broader than it's supposed to. So I really wouldn't go much broader than this. You know, something that's going to be maybe like a broad nib. So you're not going to flex this thing out to be 2 or 3 millimeters wide. So you really don't want to go nuts. You want to keep a light hand when you're using this particular nib. But if you're just looking for something with a little bit of line variation, you know, like if I want to write my name, oh boy, this is going to be a little rough, but you know, something like that. You can do some neat little kind of embellishments, flexing it out. You know, things like that. That's what it's good for. Just because this is a $500 pen doesn't mean that you're going to get $500 worth of flex out of this pen. You know, a $20 Noodler's Flex Pen is going to give you more line variation than this pen will. And this nib in particular should not be used as a flex machine, right? So let me write on here, extra-flessibile. Okay. And I'm not like super, super experienced with flexes. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that can do a much better job than I with this particular pen. So then to give a comparison here, I've got the 18 karat non-flexible extra fine nib. Okay, now this one is pretty smooth. It's got a little hint of feedback. You can see that it's actually it's going to be a little bit finer than the 14 karat extra fine, and that's just because the nib is a little stiffer than this 14 karat one. So it's not going to put down quite as much. I personally write with a little bit heavier hand. So when I'm writing with this 14 karat extra fine, it's going to write a little wetter. Like, see, you can see here with these lines, I was able to get a pretty thin line, but then me practically writing out, it's going to look a little bit broader just because of the writing pressure that I personally use. You need to write with a really light hand on that one, but this one is a little more forgiving. You can still get a little bit of line variation, you know, because it's still an 18 karat gold nib, so it's going to be pretty soft. If I'm writing with almost no pressure, this is the line that I'm getting, and that's pretty light, pretty thin. You know, so if you want to write like that, okay, sure. If you're writing really light, then my handwriting is terrible there, but you can get a really, really thin line. Me personally, I tend to write a little heavier, and this nib is very responsive about your writing pressure. Really, all of these nibs here are really kind of soft and responsive about the writing pressure. So if you want to write with very little pressure, you get a thin line, a little bit more pressure, it gets a little thicker. So I'm going to kind of alternate here with thin and thick, just to show you a little bit how the variation works there. Now this isn't writing with an intense amount of pressure, it's just kind of writing with my normal pressure. So it's the kind of thing that, like, these nibs are going to be really kind of sensitive to writing with varying amounts of pressure. So you see, if you want to get just the slightest bit of line variation, you can still get that if you have a heavy hand, even using these 18 karat nibs. You don't have to go with the extra flexible to get kind of that little bit of line variation there. But that is the 18 karat extra fine. Now I want to show you the fine. So this is the 18 karat fine nib. Okay, so this one, it's going to write, you know, a little bit broader, as you might imagine, than the extra fine. And this one really starts to feel good. The extra fine has just a little bit of tooth to it because it's a pretty fine nib. But when you get to the fine nib, that's when it starts to feel really good. Me personally, this is kind of more, I generally tend to lean towards broader nibs just because I like that smooth feeling better. But, you know, again, that's a preference thing. And this nib is going to be fairly responsive as well. If you write with a little bit heavier hand, you're going to get a little thicker line. So thin line, thick line. I'll do some alternate patterns there. So you get a little bit of variation. It doesn't seem quite as drastic on the fine nib just because you're not getting as fine a line as you are with that extra fine. Give you some figure eights here. There. Voila. That's the fine nib. This is where it really kind of starts to hit the groove. And then I've got the medium here. And this one, in my big Ogiva overview video, this is the nib that I used there. So you're already a little bit familiar with this one. Start to get much broader here. This one actually, this particular nib doesn't feel quite as smooth as the fine. Maybe it's just a quirk with this particular one, but smooth with a hint of feedback. This one's got actually a little more feedback than the fine does even. It's not scratchy or anything. That's just kind of how it feels to me. There you go. And then if I want to give a little more pressure, again, I can get an even thicker line. So thin, thick, thin, thick. And I'm just giving a little bit more pressure here as I'm writing. So you get some variation there. I'll give you some figure eights to show. This nib really starts to get pretty wet. Voila. Okay. And then lastly, my favorite. This is the one that I'm keeping for myself, which just happens to be number 007. Love that. But anyway, this is the medium italic, which you're like, okay, what is a medium metallic? A medium metallic, from Omas anyway, it measured it out. It's right at about 1.1 millimeters, okay? So it's gonna be pretty conventional as far as most of the other stubs that you might see. But the thing that I like about this one is the line variation. So this is still an 18 karat. Medium italic. Okay, in this one, you get some good variation. And the lines are really pretty crisp for how smooth this nib feels. it's really quite smooth. You know, with italics, it's always a little bit of a gamble because you never know how it's going to be ground and whether it's going to catch it all. This thing is really smooth though. And it is a pretty wet writer, but it's got these nice kind of crisp lines, but still has kind of that smoothness. So this is definitely kind of a win for me. And then the as far as the broadness goes, you know, if you wanted to flex this out a little bit, not that it really makes that much of a difference with an italic, because you're going to get the line variation just from the cross and the downstroke. But again, that 18 karat nib gives you a little bit there. So I'll go ahead and write out, you know, gouletpens.com. So get some of that line variation. I personally am always a fan of italics. And that rounds out the Omas Ogiva Alba nib selection from the 14 karat extra fine all the way through the 18 karat medium metallic. If you have any other questions about the Omas Ogiva Alba, I have an overview video on it that gives you tons of information there, or you can leave me a comment on YouTube or on the blog, and I'm happy to help you out as best I can. Thanks so much for spending time with me today watching this video. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to be notified whenever I put new videos up. And right on.